We better forget about the goddamn campaign right this minute. Not tomorrow. Now, that's what concerns me. We've got all this power, we're not using it.
Nixon's the one, Mr. Regular, a guy you can trust. Oh, he's a charmer with a face you can love. And all the pretty girls will tell you that's how come. Nixon's the one. Nixon's the one.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Harry Shearer.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out. The last time I was in this room, it was last pre-Christmas time, and my wife Judith Owen and I were here with a very hearty few of you who came through the... Now, I have some possibly, well, interesting or disturbing, I don't know, news. This was originally scheduled to start at 8, but I've gotten word from our friends at WHYY that it's being delayed until 11 to make time for an encore performance of Car Talk Live. Will you welcome Ray and Father? Just kidding. So I start talking about Nixon at this point. I grew up in Los Angeles under the persistent blaze of the California sun, and just as persistent, the dark shadow of Richard Nixon. When I was a kid listening to my parents reading the newspaper over breakfast or discussing the news over dinner, Nixon was a congressman fanning the flames of what was then known as McCarthyism, although it must have driven him crazy for it not to have become famous as Nixonism. Everybody he ran against was either a pinko or a red. That was, of course, easier in those days because no people of actual color ever ran for office. Then as I was starting school, he was campaigning for the vice presidency, saving his candidacy with a nationally televised speech. I don't even know how he got the airtime. A speech that was halfway between soupy and syrupy, fending off charges of improper campaign contributions by saying somebody had given him a dog, a little black and white dog named Checkers. And he didn't care what anybody said. He was going to keep it. This was the so-called Checkers speech as it's become known, except at the original Nixon Library, which in its orgy of renaming everything called it the Fund Crisis Speech. By the way, how quaint does that sound these days? Improper campaign contributions. As my life went on, Nixon seemed always to be in it. He ran for president against John Kennedy and famously lost the first TV debate in history by the margin, it was said, by the media at least, of a sweaty upper lip. Then he ran for governor of California and lost and gave a bitter concession speech which contained what turned out to be only the 20th or 30th most false thing he ever said, which was, quote, "You won't have Richard Nixon to kick around anymore." And of course, just as draft-age kids thought the Vietnam War couldn't get any worse or any longer, in came President Nixon with a secret plan to end the Vietnam War. The plan turned out to be stretching it out for 4 more years until after his re-election campaign. Based on his earliest years, the first enduring impression I had of Nixon was as a bare-knuckled political hardballer, street fighter, to put it mildly. There was a famous cartoon by a cartoonist for the Washington Post. His name was Herblock. Just the image of a furtive Nixon peering out from under a manhole cover. Then the Democrats ran a similar cartoon, just a picture of Nixon, bedeviled as usual by his 5 o'clock shadow, and the words over his shoulder, "Would you buy a used car from this man?" But as time went on, another aspect of Nixon's personality became more obvious to me. He seemed to me to be a guy who spent about 85% of his waking emotional energy suppressing his actual authentic emotional responses to whatever was going on around him, and the other 15% involuntarily blurting them out at the strangest possible moments. I mean, he was famous for those smiles which would happen at a time when no human being would normally smile. But the example that stands out to me was during Watergate. Nixon was always denouncing the media for what he described as obsessing on this, this scandal, whatever it was. He would say he was concentrating on more important things, peace in the world and the economy. He wasn't wallowing in Watergate. And one day after delivering this mantra, he was in Washington State, I think he was in Seattle, and he did a photo op with the governor of the state. And he began the photo op with these words: "I've just been here talking with Governor Evans. No wallowing. No wallowing there." But the flaws that made him a great comic character were really a mile deep. He was a man who had zero gift for small talk and chose to enter the career where amiable chat with a stranger is a basic required skill. He got to the top of the greasiest pole in American life, and he couldn't forgive his enemies for losing to him. The bizarre twists and turns of his personality could only be glimpsed in those odd blurts and grimaces and facial expressions until he gave us the greatest gift since a Christmas pony: the tapes. Other presidents had taped themselves, notably LBJ and Kennedy, for a good 2 minutes of laughs. I heartily recommend LBJ's telephone conversation with the president of Hager Slacks. Have any of you heard that conversation? He implores the clothier to make him a dozen more pairs of trousers, free, of course, with an inch more room from the crotch right back to the bunghole. I can't tell you how satisfying it is to hear the guy who wanted to draft my ass say the word bunghole. But both Johnson and Kennedy had control of the recording mechanism. Only the conversations they wanted preserved got recorded. Nixon was different.
Now, if anybody says anything about the tapes, you just tell them national security. Tell them national security, fuck them.
That's right, that's right. And we want to get rid of the rest of it.
That's right.
The way the tape machine works, I'd forgotten, is that they have, a Secret Service locator signal, and it tells what office you're in. And it also activates this button so that it only works, for instance, in this office when you're in it, or in the other office when you're in it, and it doesn't work at other times.
I'd rather not know.
Oh. Well, from now on, it will only be when you turn it on. The other thing they have on there, and I'd forgotten, but we instructed it sometime quite a ways back, is on your telephone here in your Oval Office, and I think in your Lincoln sitting room.
Do they record those?
On the same thing. Goes into the same thing. Everything you do is recorded. You wanted it that way. We can take those off if you want to. We can leave them on if you want to. We didn't do those conversations on your phone at Camp David. That would have involved the military.
Maybe I don't need these goddamn buttons for the future on the phone conversations. On the phone conversations, I don't think I need this. Then you would take the phone thing out then, right? I think in the future, I want to have a thing when I have to record my telephone conversations.
Taken off the phone?
Right. I would just say, mark it and say, for this date, keep the tape. And all the rest you destroy.
Oh, and the phone tapes. In other words, record them all and then destroy them periodically.
Right. Because I would just say, this tape I would like to have recorded. I think that would be worthwhile.
Well, and I don't think, see, you can have that thing on the phone anywhere, and there's no problem.
Yeah.
If you set up the other thing at Camp David, then the military will know you have it, as well as the Secret Service. Too many people might know.
Well, so this button I just push on the phone line.
You can't see it. It's just a little wire that goes off the phone.
Oh, so it plugs on there, and then you put this on?
But you have to click it in the telephone when you want it to record, and it records, and you turn it off when you don't.
Oh, it does? Well, turn it off.
Well, you have to turn it off.
Well, you... All right, you put it on there, and otherwise I would do it the way I suggest.
Nixon was a known technophobe. He was plagued by physical awkwardness, not just with people, but with equipment. So someone, we don't know exactly who, decided that his recording system would not be controlled by somebody pushing a record button. It would be automatic. Whenever a person started talking in any of the offices that were, to use a term of art, self-bugged, the tape machines would start rolling. Nixon, of course, thought he would do the editing much later in the leisure of his post-presidency as he sifted through the tapes to find evidence of his greatness for his memoirs. The joke, quite literally, was on him. Of course, no one outside the White House and very few inside it knew about the taping system while it was going on. At some point during the Watergate mess, Nixon realized that the tapes, if they ever became public, could be a dagger pointing directly at his heart. So?
Bob, I've been thinking. I'd like for you to take all these tapes, if you wouldn't mind. In other words,
Yeah.
I'd like, there's some material in there that's probably worth keeping.
Yeah.
Most of it's worth destroying. Would you do that?
Sure.
Like so many of the schemes Nixon ordered his aides to carry out, this one was amiably ignored. Among the obscure figures catapulted to momentary fame by the Watergate mess was an Air Force attaché named Alexander Butterfield. In a morning of otherwise forgettable questioning late in the hearings, he was suddenly asked, kind of out of the blue, almost as a second thought, whether there was a taping system in the White House. He paused for a moment, and then he answered that there was. At that moment, Nixon's chance of surviving as president of the United States was destroyed live on national television. An historian who was to become a friend of mine had an interesting thought. These tapes were made on government tape machines using government tape, that fully recorded tapes being swapped out for blank tapes by Navy employees. So, don't the people of the United States own the tapes? And if so, shouldn't they be publicly available to all? Nixon, of course, wanted the tapes kept secret forever. Well, the historian was a man named Stanley Cutler. He filed suit, and the court agreed with him. And that is why we have access to to more than 5 years' worth of White House conversations, unedited, unredacted, and as media people used to say in those days when confronting Nixon's seemingly unending stream of private profanity, unexpurgated. That was one of Nixon's legacies to the media that he hated so much. A lot of profanities were broadcast or printed for the first time as sound bites from the Nixon White House. My personal favorite was his press secretary, a guy who started his career as one of the guides on the jungle ride at Disneyland, by the way. You know, you can't have a straight line in people's lives sometimes. He was quoted on the front page of the LA Times as saying, quote, during the middle of the Watergate mess, he said these words, quote, "Contrition is bullshit." You know, you kind of know how the guy feels, but still. Anyway, as soon as the tapes became public, I started listening. At the time, you had to go to a warehouse on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., put on a set of, to be fair, you'd call them library-quality headphones to hear them, but they were not only an entire arsenal of smoking guns, but a mine of comedy gold. Like the meeting he had with dairy industry lobbyists during an early mini-scandal about campaign contributions from the dairy industry. When I started to play the tape, I expected to hear some juicy talk about that scandal or campaign contributions. I didn't expect to hear this.
But not to get into your business, but in your promotion, everybody's going for gimmicks these days.
Yes, sir.
Take sleep inducers. Article a couple months ago in the Reader's Digest about with regard to sleeping pills. Enormous use of them. Now, almost any person who really studies sleep will tell you probably that lacking a pill which has side effects. Best thing you can do is milk, just anything at all, just a glass of milk. Now, you don't have to talk with it or anything. It could be warm, it could be tepid, it could be cold. But it has a certain soothing effect, you see. Now, you get people started on that.
Well,
that's my marketing picture.
It didn't help sleep yesterday.
I already got that. Look, but let me tell you that the sleep problem is an American psychosis at the moment. In all advanced societies, over 50% of the American people who were adults at the time take some form of sedative. Now, you can go to work all the time, but sometimes you just got so many problems you're not going to sleep. But that's psychological too. You get people thinking that a glass of milk is going to make them sleep, and it'll do well as a sleeping pill. It's all in the head.
It's all in the head, indeed. Since the scenes Stanley and I were looking for were not evidence of skullduggery or criminality, they had not previously been transcribed. As a matter of fact, probably 90% of the White House conversations have never had transcripts made. To find the good stuff, you had to put on a set of non-library quality headphones and listen very closely. The recording quality is what is technically known in the industry as shitty. But one thing stood out as we plowed through these conversations, Stanley and I, the consistently weird nature of the conversations between Nixon and Henry Kissinger. Nixon's national security advisor, Kissinger, had built this reputation as a precocious foreign policy strategic analyst. He was also two things that Nixon hated: a Harvard professor and a Jew. So the relationship was bound to be complicated, or to put it another way, seriously twisted. It was like watching two spiders in a bottle. Kissinger adjusted to the situation by becoming a world-class ass-kisser.
This was the best speech you have given since you've been in office.
Well, I don't know. I think the November 3rd silent majority speech was better, but...
No.
We'll never have a moment like that again.
Well, the November 3rd speech was not well delivered, Mr. President, if you remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But this was a powerful speech. Yeah, this was really movingly delivered. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether you saw the commentary afterwards.
Oh, I don't read the commentary. I don't care what the hell the bastards say.
No, but this is what's so amazing. See, John Chancellor, first of all, no one was fly-specking. Mm-hmm. John Chancellor was very favorable. Everyone is saying a strong man sticking to his guns, carrying out his policy, not being driven off course.
Yeah.
Dan Rather, very positive. Marvin Cobb, very positive.
Mm-hmm.
But wait, there's more.
Hey, but it was pretty tough. No, but you handled it with extraordinary delicacy. And to stand up to that for an hour. I thought you handled China beautifully.
Well, China, we've got... I know I handled that pretty well.
We do have one minor technical problem, Mr. President. You kept mentioning November 1st, and actually you had announced it for December 1st.
Well, that's all right.
Look, if you don't mind, we would like to make it clear that the date you announced is the date that stands, the one you announced last week.
November 15th instead of October 15th.
Yeah, right. Otherwise, we're gonna have an uproar in Saigon.
That's right.
But look, it's
no, I know. I said November 1st. I meant December 1st and November 15th, right?
This is not going to create any problems.
No problem.
No, but I thought that China was beautifully handled, and you were very wise. And Oh, it was tremendously effective that you turned that first question into a little speech on peace.
What was the first question, Jen? What do you wake up about? It's a silly question.
Well, it was a silly question, but therefore hard to answer. But it was important that you had a chance to state that you...
Did I sleep? Did I dream about peace all night? Yeah, and all that crap.
And all that crap. Of course, there's nothing really new about a man of power being surrounded by sycophants. It's just that we've never gotten to be witness to the sycophancy in all of its goopy glory before. We have now. I should explain the scenes that you're seeing, by the way. I suppose you know, it's obvious to say, that's not Nixon you're watching. And I hope you know that Nixon didn't conceal cameras in the White House. He did, of course, conceal microphones. But when my partner, the aforementioned historian Stanley Cutler, and I embarked on our dumpster dive into the comedy crevasse of the Nixon tapes, we did have a purpose in mind, as opposed to just good fun. What you're seeing tonight is part of the result, a television series made and first seen in Great Britain, called Nixon's the One. Every word is as spoken on one of the tapes. In fact, every pause is accurate, every hem, every haw. No, we weren't listening to the tape in little earbuds while we were doing this show, but pretty close. We rehearsed with each tape being played for us a lot. And even though we had the best in the business making our own transcripts for us, the woman who did the same job for John Dean, for goodness sake, there were still those nasty old inaudibles, words or phrases that just refused to be understood. They were too badly recorded, or people were mumbling or talking over each other. Well, thanks to all the time I spend wasting my time on this radio show, I had a bunch of digital audio processing tools at my disposal. And as we would rehearse, I'd run the tape that we were working on through first one and then another of these tools. And like magic, out would pop words out of the murk and into the clear. So as a result, during our rehearsals, we had more script revisions each week than a troubled sitcom. But we got closer and closer and closer, and by the time we were ready to tape, we had virtually every word accounted for. As you may have already noticed, Nixon did like to talk. Usually the first question somebody asks an actor is, how do you remember all those lines? This show was the first time I thought that was a reasonable question, because Nixon loved to talk, but he didn't talk the way that a writer would write talk. Even the best writers attempting to mimic human speech, even David Mamet at his realistic best, are more linear than Nixon was. There were repetitions, restatements, reversals, oddly interesting word choices and word order. All of them, it seemed to all of us, revealing of his character. Very hard to learn, but being true to the tapes was our way of respecting this great and unique gift to the comedy world. So, for that reason, if not any other, one scene that I loved was the one I discovered where the famous television evangelist of the time, Oral Roberts, paid a visit to the Oval Office. Now, Billy Graham, of course, was famous for being a regular visitor to the White House under 5 different presidents, for whatever reason. Maybe he just liked rendering unto Caesar. But this was Oral Roberts' only visit to the White House, and thanks to his particular lord, he was determined to do most of the talking.
There may be a change in your feelings, I don't know.
It's very interesting.
But you're talking to us now.
Mm.
You were relaxed.
Relaxed, yeah.
Now, I teach myself, when that camera's on, and you see that little light on?
Sure.
Yeah. When you have to change cameras, and they have that.
The red light.
You know, they have that little light that goes off and on. I look at that light. That's a human being to me. The moment the light comes on, I'm talking to John Smith or Mary Jones. And her level of comprehension is the 7th grade.
Yep.
Of course, some viewers are up there.
Never. You always communicate with
But you have to know now, I'm only talking to you and your wife and maybe your child. And the last 2 times, you did that.
This is a moment where you almost have to feel sorry for Nixon, because he somehow allowed himself to be in the office alone with that guy. So nobody ever comes and says, it's 5 minutes, the meeting's over. This meeting went on for like 20 minutes. One might ask, in fact, you might ask if I were taking questions, which I will soon. Why do a show about the taped conversations of an American president in Great Britain? Just to remind the Brits of what they lost out because of the whole revolution thing? Yeah, sure, but there was a better reason. I didn't think a show this eccentric and peculiar could get done on an American network. Well, it could get done, but there would be a series of meetings with a very earnest programming executive saying, look, guys, I know he hated black people, but did he have to hate Jews too? The reception in London was far less ambivalent. 2 networks, the BBC and Sky, wanted to do the series, but in the end, I just couldn't resist the urge to take a little more of Rupert Murdoch's money. Thank you. And for a while, the executives at Sky were quite high on the show. How high were they? Thank you. In fact, they screened the pilot at an evening at the British Film Institute where, appropriately enough, 2 titled Brits were in attendance. Sir Tom Jones, who was doing another show for Sky, where he was doing a really good job as an actor, seriously, really, really well done. And Sir David Frost, who, of course, had had these famous series of TV interviews with Nixon. Well, he comes up afterwards and positively raves about the show, and could he asked, be involved if we were doing any more episodes? Well, you don't say no to a sir. Actually, you say no, sir, but we didn't. And so began a little acquaintanceship between me and Frosty, as he's called in London, with something akin to affection. Actually, at this point in time, all his incredible drive and un-British ambition had been sucked out of him, possibly by too many flights on the Concorde. But he was now just a smart, perfectly nice and incurably curious man who was acquainted seemingly with half the known world. Just imagine, for comparative purposes, a Larry King who actually read books. Hilversum, Holland, hello! Anyway, after the best corned beef in the world at Nate Now's, what's the problem? After the pilot episode aired, the controller for Sky called us in for a meeting. And while I sat in the lobby of Sky, having just been through another contentious negotiation in which Sky's American sister network, I forget the name of it, complained that they couldn't, well, they were losing money on The Simpsons, I found myself sitting on a couch in the lobby, atrium lobby, across from another couch on which sat 4 3 times life-size characters, inflatable characters from The Simpsons. So I guess what was costing them the money was the inflatables. Anyway, once in the controller's office, things got a lot less American again. He said, we love the show. We love the approach. We love your Nixon. And I'm waiting for the, but we want to go a different way, yeah. And instead, he said, how many more do you want to do? And I said, 5 more, because I like the idea of doing 6 shows, you know. And that was that. Except I pushed for one other thing that I thought might be interesting. I thought after the series aired, because it really is about just the crazy, bizarre, grotesque, darkly comic conversations that Nixon had, I thought it might be interesting to talk about the other Nixon, the less crazy, funny one. Stanley, my partner, had never met Nixon but had spent his life with the tapes. Frost, of course, had had the interviews with Nixon. I thought a conversation between them, two very sighted men giving their different views of the elephant, might make a good half-hour coda to the series. Sky agreed, and then one day, as we were trying to get the schedules of everybody coordinated, a chirpy young Sky executive called. Would it be possible to have an additional member of the panel, a young female British historian? My first reaction was to voice some doubt that such a person existed who had any professional knowledge of Nixon. My partner's response was more practical. Sure, he said, as long as she's wearing a bikini. The only other speed bump in the relationship, which, you know, is negligible in the larger scheme of things, came when we did post-production on the series. You may have noticed there's some different looks in these excerpts. Part of that was due to the fact that for the pilot, we never got to do a makeup test. The first time I wore the makeup was the first day of shooting. We figured out for the series that might not be the best approach. But we were very happy with the way we processed the picture quality of the first episode. Sky didn't want us to imply that Nixon had actually hidden TV cameras in the White House, because he hadn't. Suddenly they cared about the truth. But we wanted the viewer to infer from the picture quality, a bit defocused, a bit green, that these tapes were real tapes from the 70s, somehow found. So we proceeded to do the same processing with the series, since after all, they liked the pilot. But the first two episodes bounced back with the notation, doesn't pass the HD test. What? Well, of course, we'd shot the series in the highest quality of high definition video, but then degraded it to look historical. Sky now explained their brand was all HD all the time, which wasn't exactly true. They ran vintage concert tapes that weren't HD, but go argue with a box that says not HD enough, because that's what we were actually in the position of doing, arguing with a box. We spent days in a really high-end video processing suite with our really brilliant post-production director, trying to degrade the footage just enough so it looked right but wouldn't piss off the box. Nothing worked. And of course, to show it in pristine high definition would make it look like exactly what I didn't want it to look like, historic recreation theater. Finally, our production executive talked to the then head of the whole Sky operation, not the one with the clouds and the rain, just the TV one. And she said, in effect, screw the box. We chose instead just to ignore it. Anyway, no silly memos. No silly memos about whom Nixon liked and didn't like. And of course, he did have a lack of fondness for a lot of different groups of people. But the ones he came back to for more verbal abuse over and over again were the Eastern elites, the ultra-privileged people who got to go to Harvard and Yale while he was wasting his time at Whittier College. As a son of rural Southern California, he felt himself at an eternal, predestined disadvantage, even after he'd been vice president and then joined a prestigious New York law firm and then been elected president. He didn't have the let it go gene. The fire of that resentment never burned itself out.
America's upper class now has become like the British upper class. Much worse. I should say, like the French upper class before World War II. Decadent, incestuous, homosexual. I bet you agree, Bob?
Yep.
But that's true of this class generally, and that's why we're going to stay in, because that's what this country is. This country is still strong and good and decent, and there's a hell of a lot of, there's 55,000 Americans who are down 6 foot deep.
Well, they think they're being devastating when they characterize you as, middle-class moral values.
That's right.
And being a square.
All we're middle class.
And playing patriotism.
That's right. Boy, I love to screw them around, swear to God. We haven't done much, but we're going to do it in the future.
We're going to do it in the future. He'd love to screw him around. I'll ask myself the obvious follow-up question, just to save you the trouble. So, the show was made for and aired on British TV. How come it's not on TV in the United States? Well, actually it is, assuming you can connect your TV to the internet. The fact is I made this show with a partner, a British production company, that also makes a show of which I'm a big fan, as it turns out, called Episodes. I don't know if you've seen it on Showtime. Yeah, I like it. It's a very funny show. They took on the job of selling the Nixon series here, and while they may have been selling, no one was buying. I'd love to blame the American networks and channels which passed on the series, but since I may want to work here again, I'm going to blame my British partner. My favorite negative reaction was reported to be from PBS, which said, "This series is just too different from our normal fare." I was thinking about making that a billboard for the show, since it's such a badge of honor given, let's say, Susie Orman and reruns of Lawrence Welk. But please give. So in a situation which now feels like an opportunity that came dressed as a disappointment, I wrested back the distribution rights to the show and decided to put it on YouTube, because unlike those niche cable channels, which are, you know, channel 452 in one county and channel 275 in another county, everyone knows how to find YouTube and everyone can see it for free. And that's my goal, is for as many people to see it as possible. Speaking of television, Nixon was obsessed with the medium. It had saved his bacon early on with the Chequers speech, and then it almost destroyed him when he lost the televised debate to Kennedy. He just couldn't quite work it out. It fascinated him. He spent the rest of his career and much of his presidency just trying to figure it out.
I saw a little of Laughing last night. Pretty bad. I don't know. I don't see how it's doing, but it's not doing well because you don't hear anything about it.
I don't think it's doing as well as it had a little spurt for a while, but I understand it's sort of
gone down.
The ratings have gone down. But there isn't anything good on television, apparently.
Is that right?
Well, there's just, the choices are so bad. There are apparently no good new shows this season. It's such a horrendous thing that there isn't that much good stuff available.
There's still not.
Yeah, but there's not much good stuff available. The world doesn't create that much good stuff.
I want you to keep looking into this business of have Flanagan give us a really cold, dirty assessment of whether the way to destroy the networks is not to let them build a new TV system. I mean, they're so obsessed about this. I'm just inclined to think that maybe we're holding off there for the wrong reason. You know what I mean? Maybe that's one service that we can render.
Although Nixon was alternately fascinated and repelled by the media, during the series you'll see his bewildered, appalled response to an episode of All in the Family, even though he doesn't even know what it is. He knew he wanted to destroy the media, and he knew why.
You can't talk about it publicly. You know Paul Keyes?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was telling me about his show. He said it's the same true for all the Hollywood shows. 11 out of 12 writers are Jewish.
That's right.
Now, in the media, Life magazine, totally dominated by Jews. Newsweek, owned by Jews, totally dominated by them and on the editorial pages. New York Times, Washington Post, totally Jewish. Now, the other thing is the three networks. Now, except they all have a front man, Howard K. Smith, Brinkley, Cronkite, who may not be of that persuasion. The writers, 95% of them are Jewish. Now, what does this mean? Does this mean that all Jews are bad? No. What it does mean is most Jews are left-wing, particularly the young ones are like this, way out, radical, peace at any price, except where support of Israel is concerned. Let me tell you something. Every Democrat candidate is going to owe his election to the Jewish people. I will never. Now, the point I make is this. The difficulty is not just that they're Jews, but boy, they take care of each other.
Yeah, baby. What's wrong with that? Well, you may have noticed a particular poster as you walked in to the venue. If you haven't yet seen it, You'll see it on the way out. It features a photo of the young Richard Nixon, well, youngish, never looked young, and the slogan of his first presidential campaign, which coincidentally is the title of this series, Nixon's the One. The lettering, though, I would call your attention to. It's written in the particular font that was popular in 1968 among the kids, known as psychedelic. That's right, the same kids Nixon was demonizing as a subversive threat to the nation, and the lettering that had become famous as the visual brand for music made and listened to under the influence of LSD. It might have been ironic if it weren't for the fact that it was merely pandering. I never knew that poster existed until, I'd never seen it until 2 years ago. I'd made this series, and a friend of mine in Washington, D.C., a longtime journalist there, called me and said she'd received an invitation to an event she thought I might like to attend as her guest. A sizable party in a ballroom of Washington, D.C.'s Mayflower Hotel to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Nixon's birth. Could I resist the temptation to see all the surviving loyalists in one room? I could not. There was Pat Buchanan refighting all the old culture wars and some of the new ones. And I have to interrupt myself just to recall, some years earlier I was in Washington at a taping of the McLaughlin Group. Anybody remember that show? And when Buchanan was still on it, and I was having a conversation with Morton Kondrack. He was on the McLaughlin Group in those days, and talking about somebody who seemed to be an anti-Semite in terms of what he had just written in an editorial in the New York Times, an op-ed in the New York Times. And Pat Buchanan was walking behind Kondracki at that moment, and he just pointed to him and says, "There's a real anti-Semite." Just quoting. And back to this Nixon 100th anniversary, and there was Henry Kissinger, and walking, talking proof that evil really is the best anti-aging secret. He delivered a keynote speech that night, did Kissinger, the point of which was that Nixon was such a great president precisely because he let Kissinger run things. And scattered around the entrance alcove to the ballroom were vintage Nixon campaign posters, including psychedelic lettering Nixon. What a night. And now, without a young female British historian to join me, a couple of thoughts about the guy they were there to honor. Not the comic character, but the president. To anyone who loathed the Vietnam War, at the time, Nixon was a figure of great menace and deviousness. We had no idea quite how much of both at the time. But speaking of tapes, the BBC broadcast some of Lyndon Johnson's tapes recently. In one of them, he's on a conference call with the three guys running to replace him in 1968, one of whom was Nixon. He tells them in that election year that he's starting ceasefire negotiations with the Vietnamese in Paris, and he knows none of them, all of them love their country, none of them would want to do anything to interfere with these talks. Next tape, Johnson's furious. He's discovered that Nixon has sent the widow of a World War II flying ace, Anna Chennault, to tell the South Vietnamese president, don't participate in the ceasefire talks, you'll get a better deal when Nixon is president. Johnson on tape actually accuses Nixon of a little thing called treason. Next tape has Johnson telling the head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, to bug Nixon. Nixon knows about this bugging, or finds out somewhat later, as he tells his Treasury Secretary, John Connally, in this episode from our series.
Incidentally, you know the situation with regard to our own. I told you.
You just told me the plane was bugged. That's all that was, wasn't there?
Now we are never going to put that out.
Well, this morning
We've got no reason to embarrass Johnson, but I think you will know what the situation is. Edgar Hoover told Mitchell that our plane was bugged for the last 2 weeks of the campaign. Now the reason it was for bugging it, Johnson had it bugged. Johnson ordered it bugged personally, and Humphreys. I think, I'm not sure about Humphreys, I know about ours. The reason Johnson said he had it bugged was because he was talking about, he had his Vietnam plans there, and he had to have information as to what we were going to say about Vietnam. But the plane was bugged.
God.
For that entire 2 weeks period by J. Edgar Hoover. And Johnson had every conversation in it. And you know where it was bugged? In my compartment. So every conversation that I had for 2 weeks, Johnson had. Now, we are never going to say anything because why embarrass? I mean, it would look like hell, but and I don't want the pressure.
By the way, the reason Johnson didn't make this public at the time is that had he revealed all of this, it would have made clear that he knew about the contact with the South Vietnamese because Johnson was bugging the South Vietnamese embassy. But how ironic that Nixon gets pissed off at somebody bugging him. I'm one of the few people, by the way, who think that what the burglars were sent looking for when they went into Democratic headquarters was the evidence of all this. Nixon knew that whatever Johnson had on tape was no longer in the White House. He had told Haldeman to search for it. Haldeman had come back and said, it ain't there. What he didn't know was that Haldeman had given it to one of his advisors, told him keep it secret for 50 years. He didn't. He gave it to the LBJ library. They made it public a few years ago. That's how the BBC got it. And of course, let's not forget that also in the Nixon White House was Nobel Peace Prize winner Henry Kissinger, who helped arrange the assassination of a democratically elected president of Chile, as well as the secret bombing of Laos and Cambodia. Thank God we don't have a warlike Nobel Peace Prize winner running around the White House anymore. On the other hand, speaking of which, as long as I'm stepping on some toes, it's interesting to note, it occurred to me, as a matter of fact, while we were taping the series, as offensive, to put it mildly, perhaps criminal, as Nixon's foreign policy was, many of his domestic policies were far to the left of the current president's. Under Nixon, sometimes only with his lukewarm assent, but under Nixon, the EPA was created, OSHA was created, the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts were passed, and strangest of all, late in his truncated second term, Nixon actually gave a speech, didn't do anything about it, but he gave a speech calling for a guaranteed annual income for all Americans. So politically, if he were alive today, he'd be lodged about halfway between Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren and totally pissed off about being surrounded by women. And now, the goofiest, and some viewers have said, the most poignant moments in the series, and maybe in the whole presidency. As I said, this was a man with a big hole where the small talk gene should be. He probably succeeds in a business where success is normally based on the ability to churn out amiable chat with strangers. Now he's lost his fight to stay in office. He's 8 minutes away from resigning the presidency live on national television. He walks into the Oval Office for probably the last time. He's got a humiliating task to perform on live national TV. And what does he do in those 8 minutes? He makes inane small talk with the crew.
Mr. President, this is Bill Headline. He'll be producing the pool for CBS tonight, and he will cue you.
Hi, Bill. Yeah, how are you?
All right.
Yeah. You got an extra camera in case lights go out? Where'd you get that from? Is that an NBC?
This is the camera. This is the primary camera.
Yeah.
That's the backup camera.
Yeah. And that's an NBC camera, I presume.
No, they're both CBS cameras.
Standard joke. It's, let's see, to get these adjusted properly, my eyes, you'll find as you get past 60. That's enough. Thanks. My friend Ollie always wants to take a lot of pictures. I'm afraid he'll catch me picking my nose. You wouldn't print that, though, would you, Ollie?
No, sir.
No, you wouldn't. All right. All Secret Service? Any Secret Service in the room?
Just one agent, Mr. President.
Out. You don't have to stay, do you?
Yes, sir.
You required to?
Yes, sir.
I was just kidding.
Now he's just finished his speech.
We're clear.
Have a Merry Christmas, fellas.
That scene, by the way, occurred on August 8th. Well, he wasn't going to see him again. That scene, by the way, was the only one in the series not to come from the White House audio tapes. The taping system had been shut down by then. But fortunately for all of us who love really dark comedy, an anonymous engineer at CBS, not NBC, CBS, gee, it said CBS on the cameras, didn't it? Hit the record button the minute he saw Nixon walk into the office to deliver the speech. The scene went viral, as a matter of fact, years before that term was in its modern use. It had been dubbed on VHS, as passed around to those who were in on the joke. I'd invite people over to watch it, and I'd memorized it years ago. And I'd always seen these moments as just improbably goofy because, you know, of what I was saying about small talk. Until we were rehearsing. And, you know, this is mystical actor bullshit that I don't really... Somebody dated an actor. Parenthetically, my favorite version of crazy actor bullshit was, I'll get back to this thing in a minute, but I remember when Daniel Day-Lewis was doing promotional activity on behalf of Lincoln, the movie that he was in a couple years ago. And he said in one of the interviews, you know, I was so into character that when we weren't doing scenes, I'd just sit in my chair at the side of the set making phone calls and texting as Lincoln. OMG, Mary's invited me to the theater tonight, LOL. Anyway, we were rehearsing this scene, and I stumbled on a memoir by a White House staffer who had been in the Oval Office this night when that happened. And he was the one who had those final words about Merry Christmas. So at that moment, when I saw those words, I started realizing what Nixon was doing. On the brink of his ultimate humiliation, he wasn't dwelling there. He was already planning his next campaign, the one for his own rehabilitation. I think he thought those crew members were going to go home that night, talk to their families and their friends the next day, and they were going to say, hey, he wasn't depressed, he wasn't angry, he was a nice guy, he was joking around, he even wished us a Merry Christmas on August 8th. So that's Nixon and me. I think these conversations are both universal and particular in the sense that we probably will never see another world leader quite this strange and goofy again, aside from Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi and goofy old Tony Blair. I find it hard to believe, despite differences in character flaws, that world leaders today aren't sitting around having somewhat similar conversations with their advisors and courtiers and sycophants. Of course, we'll never know for sure because we'll never get this particular Christmas pony ever again. Thanks. Thank you.
Nixon's the one, Mr. Regular, a guy you can trust. Oh, he's a charmer with a face you can love. And all the pretty girls will tell you that's how come Nixon's the one.